which is Are Magic, Realism and Absurdism the Best Way to Capture Our Complex Times? And to talk about this, we have with us Cristina Sanchez-Andrade, Mercedes Cebrian, Swapnamoy Chakraborty, and Vikram Paralkar, who will be in conversation with Mr. Samantak. Please, a round of applause for our speakers.
As some of you saw, we were sitting at the back and discussing how to do this because we have a rather strange panel in a sense. We've got Cristina and Mercedes. How many of you have read their works? Raise your hands. I thought as much. And we've got Vikram. Some of you may have heard of him. And we've got Swapnamoy, who's by far, at least to this audience, the best known of the authors, winner of the Ananda Puraskar, champion of LGBT, the first novel regarding LGBT characters which won a prize in Bengali. So I thought maybe we could begin by saying a little bit about Cristina and Mercedes, and I'll begin with Mercedes because she wears many hats. She's a journalist, a translator, poet, and also a writer of fiction. I've read, like all of you, I Googled their names and then I followed the tracks and I read some excerpts from her collection of pieces. I don't know whether they can be called stories, called Burp, and she's got some other works as well. That's Mercedes. Cristina has an award-winning novel called The Winter Lynx, which is about two sisters who come back to a village in Galicia, Spain. Correct me if I'm getting details wrong. and what happens to them and their reactions. And they are, in a sense, the pretty sister and the ugly sister, within quotes. And Vikram, who's also a doctor, he's available for consultancy after this. NRI doctor, so his fees are quite high. But he's written, this is his second work, second novel. And this is set in India, The Wounds of the Dead. And I'm not giving away the plot if I tell you that it concerns 3 dead people who turn up at a village clinic and want to get their wounds stitched and cured, and sort of, not three and a bit, I won't tell you what that bit is. And Swapnamoy who's Swapnamoy Chakraborty, who's, who's one of the living greats of Bangla Sahitya, hundreds of short stories. Apnar kota upanyash ache? How many novels? 20, over 23. 20 novels only, and hundreds of short stories, and the lengths of his fiction have varied from just 4-5 lines to novel length. So maybe I will begin in this order with Cristina. And could you tell us a little bit about The Winter Lynx and what made you write it, and also address the question of magic, realism, and absurdity in today's reality?
Well, hello. Thank you very much for being here. Before I answer you, I would like to, because I think it's important to tell you about my experience. This is first time in India, and our experience in the streets of Calcutta yesterday and today. I think it is very important because maybe to understand that. Yesterday we were also in the opening of the Nobel Prize Yunus, and he was talking about this metaphor he has for comparing bonsais with poor people, and he was explaining that if you plant the best seed of a tree in a very small pot, you will have a replica of that tree, but you would never have a very tall tree. This is not because of the seed, but because of the soil base. Well, I considered myself, before arriving to Calcutta, a kind of at least in literature, a kind of expert in senses, because it's something I use a lot in my literature. Senses, smells, what I hear, what I touch, is something very important for me. I also teach creative writing, and I always insist on senses. And I thought I knew something about senses until I arrived here. So I've discovered that it's maybe not the problem of the seed, but of the soil base. And well, I've written down some of the things I experienced yesterday and today, like the sound of the horns, the lively music, the smell of curry, dirt and urine, the obscure and impenetrable gaze of some people, the smell of fresh chopped onions, flowers and curry, the beauty of colorful saris, the barking of dogs and the bleating of goats, the laughter of children, the feeling of excitement and frustration at the same time. And I only just wanted to say thank you for offering all this to me. Thank you very much. And apart from that, well, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about the title of my novel. It is called The Winter Lynx. This is a sort of weird word, which in Spain is las inviernas, which it doesn't mean anything. Invierno, as in English, winter, it's the word, and it's the feminine plural of winter. So, and it's the name of a little small town in Spain. And I thought it was a very beautiful name for a novel because of what you find behind the name. It's sort of darkness and two women at the same time, something you don't understand, but you do understand at the same time. And I think, well, critics have said that it has something to do with magical realism. I think it has to do with, but we have to think first, maybe, what is magical realism? It's a kind of newish name for an old thing, I think. And I think when we mention magical realism, we remember the word magical, but not realism. So I think my novels are also based in reality.
And, you know, Mercedes, one thing I found interesting about her works, and it's also there in a little bio, is the way in which human beings develop relationships with inanimate objects. So, you know, would you care to comment on that in the light of magical realism?
Hi, good afternoon or evening? Evening? Late afternoon. Good late afternoon. Can you imagine my position? Nobody knows me. It's like I am supposed to be intelligent and inspiring. And I feel like so small now because I feel I'm, as a writer, we all only write about our universe, and my universe is very narrow. It's like, oh my gosh, why am I here? But what I would like to say is that the metaphor I would like to use, the same as Janos used that one Cristina mentioned about the bonsai, the small tree. I think that writers, we choose glasses to wear. I wear my own glasses because if not, I cannot do anything. I'm very short-sighted, but as well, I think as a writer, I use the glasses of absurdity. It's like I wear them, and then I can see the world in a way that surprises me permanently. Apart from what I have seen here in India in these 2 days, which I don't think I need those glasses to get so wondered about what I've seen. But sometimes in our daily lives, we think we know everything. We are supposed to understand what we do every day because we have breakfast or we go to work. And then if you put on those glasses, that shows that some of our habits or the way we relate to each other are ridiculous. I think that helps you to write, and as a writer, I appreciate that. I don't know, as you don't know my work, I can just tell you, for example, I have a collection of short stories, and in one of them, there is like a story in which there is only the last man who is on Earth, and the last woman is set in the future. But still though, even if the woman who is a librarian, but nobody reads those books because there are no people available, this woman wants to meet the man, like, because she feels lonely, and he says, no, I'm busy, I have to do my workout and go to the gym, so please, don't, you are all the time stalking me. So this is like a paradox in a way. I don't feel so connected with the tag of magic realism, but it's because of what I've learned about it and read. Is more, I associate it more with a rural society maybe, but this is, of course we can discuss it and probably it's not right. But so I feel more connected with the word absurd because I live in an urban area, and I write mainly about urban life in a big city, like, well, Madrid, where I live, is not as big as Kolkata, but we all have similarities, like chaotic things, being in a hurry, and also feeling very lonely. That's why I speak a lot about the attachment we feel sometimes with things. I think the best example is with our mobile phones. I think if someone loses their mobile phone, they have to do they are grieving for it for some days, as you will grieve for a friend who has disappeared or who is far away. It's terrible, but in a way it's true. So it's not. It's realism. That's real. Those emotions, and also I think we are living interesting times. Well, I guess that in the 18th century they could think also like we are living interesting times or difficult times. It's not that only these times are difficult, but these times it's true that there is a change of paradigm. I think due to technology, and I can see it in my own brain how I start to think differently and have all these problems that are in theory associated with technology, that we are not so capable of concentrating in one task, but we are more multitask. I can see this in myself, and I think it's a source of inspiration for writing about, and I will always choose the glasses of absurdism.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pick on three words that she used. One is metaphor. The other is, interesting times. Incidentally, that's a Chinese curse. If you want to curse someone, you say, may you live in interesting times. There's a novel by Terry Pratchett called Interesting Times. But, it has to do with what you were saying about realism. I just want to read out the first little section of this novel. And I want you to pay attention to the way in which it's written. This is the opening of the novel, The Wounds of the Dead, by Vikram, who's a doctor based in, where, At Philadelphia. And this is how it begins. The day the dead visited the surgeon, the air in his clinic was laced with formaldehyde. His pharmacist had poured some into a beaker in the operating room and given it a night to scar every corner. Once the door was opened, the acrid fumes spilled into the corridor and death leached out of the walls. This was the usual death, the mundane kind, that of insects and vermin. Now, what I find interesting, and this sort of links her work, Mercedes' work, Vikram's work, and of course Swapnamoy's work, is that the language is very matter of fact, very simple. There are no pyrotechnics happening there. How would you, do you think you consciously create metaphors, or, are you writing an allegory? And what's the link between the language that you use, which is very, ordinary, almost like reportage, and this business of metaphor or allegory?
I have a quick point to make about the cell phone, by the way. My mom got a new cell phone and she lost her entire contact list, and she's still mourning because, in a way, the change of technology has caused her to lose all of humanity. so speak about how we get attached to technology. For me, I think there's a very interesting story by the great Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges called The Library of Babel, which actually addresses both the issues of magic realism and absurdity that we're talking about. So the story is this way. There is an infinite library with an infinite number of rooms, and on every shelf there are books. Every book is of the exact same size, has the same number of pages and the same number of sentences, except same number of lines, except that inside the book is just a random scramble of letters, punctuation marks, and spaces. And so if you keep searching, at some point you'll find the Mahabharata. At some point you'll find the Ramayana. And within this infinite library of random works, there is every truth, there is every lie, there is every sacred text, and every blasphemy. And so the story is about these librarians who spend their entire lives trying to find truth by wandering through this library.
It's online now.
I'm sorry?
It's online.
It is
now.
online, yes.
Yeah, there is something called the Library of Babel. If you type in your name and you hit search,
it will find this in the random library. So these librarians spend their entire lives trying to find the truth within this library. But we, looking at the story from the outside, know that they are looking at something that is completely devoid of meaning and trying to impose upon it their own meaning. And so in a way, that book, as a magic realism story, reveals sort of the absurd state that all of humanity finds itself in sometimes. The sense that we are trying to find meaning from a universe that is just refusing to give it to us. And so this is an example of a metaphor for our existence portrayed within the book, within that short story. In my book, it's actually really the magic realism implies that the magic is in some way a part of the background, that the characters don't comment on it. And in my book, actually, as soon as just to elaborate a little more on the plot, there's a surgeon in the... I shouldn't? Okay.
Don't tell them everything because they won't buy the book.
No.
Well, so give them enough to tantalize you to buy.
Yeah, so it's set in a tiny clinic in rural India where a surgeon, frustrated with his life, is working and trying to live an honest existence, embattled with all the bureaucracy that you can imagine. And then one night he's visited by a man, his pregnant wife, and their 8-year-old son. And they reveal to him that they are dead and that they need him to stitch up their wounds so they can return to life at dawn. And in a way, this you could say this is a metaphor for the struggle for life. Here, the dead are themselves coming back to life. And then it's a metaphor for the normal daily conundrum of the doctor. How do I save the person in front of him? Extended sort of into a much larger dimension. A surgeon actually trying to bring the dead themselves back to life. And facing a number of ethical and moral questions for which there are no easy answers.
I'll pick up on that and go to Swapnamoy, whose work I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with. Because death keeps occurring in his stories, sometimes in the most horrifying ways. But the interesting thing, at least for me, and I haven't read all of your novels, but only some, and quite a few of his short stories, is that it's all narrated so matter-of-factly. I mean, if I may be allowed to talk in Bangla for a minute, এত সাধারণ সাবলীল দৈনন্দিন চলিত ভাষায় লেখা যে আমাদের মনেই হয় না যে আমরা ভয়ঙ্কর একটা কিছু পড়ছি, কিন্তু সেখানে হয়তো একটা বর্ণনা হচ্ছে যে একজনকে কুপিয়ে কেটে একটা বাক্সের মধ্যে পুড়িয়ে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, বা একজনকে গুলি করে মেরে দেওয়া হয়েছে, তা সেখান থেকে রক্ত পড়ছে. It's all very normal, very matter of fact. So Swapnamoy, how important is death in your fiction? And মানে আপনি এত মৃত্যু নিয়ে, why do you talk so much about that?
No, before that I like to state that declare that rather I am North Kolkata born Bengali medium school backbencher. So my communication skill in English is horrible, and it will be your credit if you can communicate me. I don't know how extent you can understand what I will say. And before that, I greet you all in stage and beyond the stage, in small stage and that greater stage. Okay. Thing is this, I have dealt with some killing, but not that I am a thriller writer. Occasionally, 3 or 4 incident of killing has come in my 200 or 250 stories. Accidentally, Samantak gone through those killing stories. I don't know. Today's discussion is on this absurdism and magic realism. What extent it can cater the complex society, the problems of this day. This is very funny thing, magic and reality. This is two opposite things. Magic is illusion and reality is against the illusion. When I heard this magic realism, I first, Manobendranath Bandyopadhyay's professor, 15 years or 16 years back, he told me, how many Latin American literature you have read already 16 years back? I have told, no sir, Manobda, I did not go through any, not even Marquez at that time, 1993 or 94. Manobendra told that, no, I have read you some of stories and it is, I think it is influenced by Rulfo and Carpentier. But this is all Greek to me. I don't know who are they. Oh, sorry, 93, 94. At that time I started writing man and machine relationship. Before that, I like to say 1 minute that a magic realism, when today only, when I was coming, I was in a car, I thought, I recapitulate Batshayan. Batshayan described some embracing, some art of embracing. One is Lata Bestitok, like a climber embracing a big tree. Another is this Kiro Nirok, that means milk mixed with water. You cannot separate water from milk. You cannot separate milk from water. Here, it is such a realism, you cannot separate realism and illusion. Illusion and realism is attached, knitted. It is one unique thing when illusion and realism is knitted. One thing is this, 15 years or 20 years back, I was pondering this relation with the man and machine. Suppose, especially when a mixing machine came in my kitchen, a mixer. One mixie, this is a gadget. And I thought, this is competitor of my mother. It is not helping. I told my mom that, so you see, mom, how nice this sarbat came from this mixie, you cannot do. But my mother makes sarbat, lassi for me, add curd, sugar, water. So passionately she is mixing this and take. Boy, this is your lassi. And in a mixing machine, just you connect, switch on, and by few seconds you will get foam, lassi with foam. I told how, it's a good, you cannot do. This is the competition with anyone. So one love and hate relation came out from machine. Suppose you have a VCR or TV, you were doing some embroidery for cover, like what you are doing for your son. It is a family member. No. So
like
this is complex thing. But I cannot write in linear way. I have to invent some other technique to state this type of relationship. And I astonished that when Vikram told that, but I am here 1,000 or 1,500 kilometer away from Vikram, but my thinking is like same, but we never in a seminar. We never in a seminar. This is the product of the age. This is the product of the time.
Swapnamoy, I'm reminded of two things. One is, of course, Garcia Marquez's famous Nobel speech, in which he says that I just write the way things are. There's nothing magical about what I write about. And the other is something which I just was given. I'm not looking at my mobile phone in order to check messages. But just, on my way here, this is an article that came out, I think a day ago, which basically says Padmavat Rao, Rajput women click photos, selfies and issue Johar threats. So you've got all of these, very stylishly dressed Rajput women who are in Chittor and who are taking selfies and putting it on Facebook and saying we are going to burn ourselves to death if they screen this film on a fictional queen written by a Muslim man. And, so in a sense, our reality itself is absurd. That's what I'm trying to say, So I would want it's there, and they're gathering there, and presumably after reading this, some of you might feel inspired to go to Chittor, take a selfie, and then pour kerosene, whatever. But, I would like you to comment on that. I mean, would you agree if I say that our times themselves are absurd, so there's no point saying absurd separately?
Yeah, I agree. And I have another anecdote of Garcia Marquez. He was always asked about magical realism. And he says, he talks about naturalness. He says, he tells, well, as you know, all his stories are very much inspired in Aracataca, the place where he was born, and his grandmother and his family, his very big family. And he's got a very interesting anecdote, and he tells about his aunt. And his aunt was embroidering in a corridor when someone came in with a very weird egg. It was a sort of hen's egg, but with a lamp. And they came to his aunt because this was a sort of consultory. And so everybody came in there to ask about very weird questions. So this girl came with the egg, and she said, "Look what I have here, an egg with a lamp. Do you know what this is?" And then the aunt said, "Oh yes, it's a basilisk egg. Just go to the patio, lit a fire, and burn it." So that's what I did. And Garcia Marquez explains that the sort of motionless face his aunt put when he said, "Just go to the patio and lit a fire," or the brick face he put to explain this, was one of the keys of 100 years solitude. I mean, just things are how they are. There's no explanation. I mean, this is a basilisk egg, and no more, just burn it. And it says, I never found out what a basilisk is, but it doesn't matter. So, yeah, so I think it's just the key is just finding the connection with reality.
Mercedes, before I come to, would you comment on that? Because on the one hand, your sort of professional life as a doctor has to deal with, horribly real things in a sense, because you're an oncologist, so you deal with people who've got, cancers and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, you write these fictions which are, in a sense, absurd. Do you find your life absurd as well when you're dealing with disease? I mean, disease is an absurdity, in a sense.
You know, if you look at tales that have come down from every culture, mythological tales, whether they're Egyptian, whether they're Indian, Chinese, Japanese, there's always magic in all of those tales. It's actually very interesting that realism seems to be a creation that perhaps began with some plays of Shakespeare and then beyond, and then 19th century realists like Stendhal, etc., writing very, very stories that are completely grounded in the real world.
So but realism might be the absurd
realism
thing.
might be the artifice.
Exception.
Realism might be the artifice, because anytime a mother tells a story to a child, ask yourself how much of the story is real. She's constantly confabulating, and I think that's our nature. The stories that we tell are constantly confabulating, and I think and you know, many of these end up becoming lore. For example, the late departed Kim Jong-il of North Korea. It's said that when he was born, the birds started singing on the top of the mountain in North Korea, and this is part of this. If you ask a North Korean, they will attest that this actually happened.
They actually saw it. They heard the singing.
They actually heard the birds. The birds speaking, singing in words, not just singing their music. And so I think, but the use of confabulations and fabulism allows us to tell something about the real world, because eventually we are living in the real world. So actually my first novel, The Afflictions, is a collection of imaginary magic realism, if you would say, diseases. And it takes ideas from real existing diseases and real human suffering, and then tries to make these fabulous tales out of it. And so I think we live in the real world, we have to live in the real world, but the ability to inject magic into it gives a little extra push to our ability to write stories about it.
Right. How would you respond to that? I mean, do you think we live in an absurd world?
I have always thought that. But I want also to say something like a nuance, and it's also about societies. Some of them are maybe more absurd than others, and it has to do with the authors you have mentioned here. I am so happy because many of them are Spanish-speaking authors. Borges from Argentina, and then Rulfo was mentioned from Mexico, Garcia Marquez from Colombia, and Carpentier from Cuba. And I think Spanish writers have learned a lot from Latin American writers, also because their societies were colonial societies for a while, and they had to deal with lots of things mixed. They were much more mixed, heterogeneous, different races, and then Spain became like a country with dull literature in a way. And it happens the same with Brazil and Portugal. So this post-colonial situation allows everybody to have a different mindset. But for me as a writer, I'm so glad that it was in Latin America where mainly all these new trends were produced. And so it shows a lot about their societies and about their imagination.
I think in Latin America, where the Western world is concerned, in a sense, because we've always had this tradition, Swapnamoy, of these fantastic stories, whether it is the Betal Pancho Vingshoti, whether it is Thakumat Jhuli. Would you like to talk about this, the way in which you tell a story, and how much of what you write is influenced by oral traditions, golpo shona, golpo bola, ekটু যদি বলেন.
But thing is this, the story, what we do during our gossip, this is not that artistic story. That is story. Let us come and have some story. That is different. And story, when it is art form, this is different. And this is our oral story. These all are absurd. Absurd means this is unreal. Suppose, just remember what your grandmother told during, that is not real. This is some Aesop fable, our traditional stories, all are symbolized, all are fabulous, but it is not real. But actually what happens, this today, we herited that our oral tradition. Suppose I will write a story on consumerism. So I can imagine an imaginary state where all Ravans are living there. All Ravans. All have 10 heads. 10 heads means 10 mouth. That means 320 teeth. So one toothpaste company can sponsor, they are sponsor of that state. This is a toothpaste company. So it is a story of this time. We can write a story, taking link from our Ramayana. Like this, you know that Vastroharan. Vastroharan means it is in the Mahabharata.
The disrobing of Draupadi. You know,
it is in Mahabharata.
The disrobing of the Draupadi is disrobing in the Mahabharata, which sets up the entire conflict.
Draupadi was undressed by some Dushashan, they are villain in Mahabharata, and God, Lord Krishna, he supplies cloth to Draupadi.
So they can never disrobe.
Okay. Now I can write this story in other way. Now one textile company supplies this continuous supplying of clothes. Bimal, this is Bimal, this is Bimal, this is Bimal. And Draupadi is rolling around and she is getting her cloth from Krishna. Now Krishna is now owner of Bimal. So we can what should I say?
Create these new realities.
Create one new reality. I don't know if it is magic realism or it is absurdism. You can say it is absurd. How it could be? But when Krishna supplies cloth to Draupadi, yes, we are accepting. It could be because he is God. Actually, what happened? We created history, but God could not create history. God created nature, we created history. We can explain our history in our own way, we can create our history in our own way, according to our need. Actually, what happened, there are nothing in the world happen automatically, not even river. River goes according to flow of water, and flow has its own rule, some parameter. So flow of our thinking, this is governed by, this is regulated by some other social parameters. So I believe this. And we have to create our sentences, our syntax, according to my need. So it's changing. Yes, what Vikram told. Realism is product of 19th century. Our Tolstoy, O. Henry, Balzac, and other Sharat Chandra, and other master writers, they wrote in linear way. But actually, there are some embroidery. It is apparently linear, but it is not linear. There is some artistic embroidery. This is very good way, masterly way to write, but this is very tough. So in complex time, to explain, to cater the complexity of the time, so we have to, we cannot write linearly. This is very tough. If somebody can this is his credit. I cannot condemn that linear writing is bad.
Right.
I had a quick point to make. Actually, I think any discussion of absurdity in our current times would be incomplete without mentioning the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Because I routinely find myself in a position in the United States where Donald Trump tweets that the sky is red. And now there are all kinds of people who are saying, well, of course the sky is red. And if you don't agree it is red, then you hate America, you were a Hillary Clinton supporter, you the support of the deep state and all that kind of nonsense. And so we are at a point where we cannot even agree on what is reality. And I actually expect that over the next decade, there's going to be a lot of literature and art and cinema that will probably explore this fracture of agreement we have just in common society about simple facts, about what constitutes the actual world around us, let alone magic realism.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we have all agreed that we live in a kind of absurd world, but something that happened when Swapnamoy was talking or when Vikram was talking was laughter. And I heard some of you laugh when he mentioned Trump's name or when Swapnamoy spoke about Draupadi being sponsored by Bimal. There was laughter. How important is humor and laughter to your writing? Just quick responses and then I'll open it up for questions to the audience. So just, one by one. How important
well,
is
in
it?
my case, I'm very glad you asked about this because in my case, humor and laughter are really important. First, because I have to enjoy myself when I'm writing because it's a very, it could become very boring if you, if you're not having a nice time. And then, sometimes I find myself, laughing about what some of my characters says, which is a very nice feeling when you're writing. Yeah, but I think it's a kind of counterpoint for things that are happening, very brave, strong things that are happening in real life. And also, I think readers want to find enjoyment also in reading. I'm not saying that all that we need to write with humor always. Sometimes it's not possible, but it is important. And you were talking about the president of the U.S. And absurdism. This reminds me of I think the best examples of absurdist literature are maybe, for example, the Metamorphosis of Kafka. This man, this person who wakes up and finds himself transformed into a bag. And maybe there's another one which is Gogol's Nose. I don't know if you've read this story. It's about a man who finds one morning that his nose is climbing off of his face and develops an independent life. It's incredible. So, and when I listen to the news or watch television and I hear about Trump policies, I really find things even more incredible than these stories about the bug and the nose becoming developing a independent life. Yeah.
So, Mercedes?
In my case, again, I have another pair of glasses for humor, so I cannot take them off. I always write with this tone. Some people ask me, so you add humor to your writing, as if you could add something like a sauce, like, pass me the sauce, and I will add it.
Some tomato sauce in your vodka,
and it's
call
not
it a Bloody
like
Mary
that. It's something I cannot choose. It's a position in life. And I think the comedian or the satirical writer is very connected to someone who writes tragedy. It's just another way of seeing it. And the last thing I will say is that in this crazy time we are living, this sentence, this saying that is stranger than fiction is totally timely. And I follow a satirical newspaper online. I love it. It's just satirical news, imaginary news, but sometimes in the real so-called newspapers, I think, well, is this news from the real newspaper or it belongs to the satirical newspaper? You are not sure.
We've just banned Darwin in our country. So, yeah, go on. The theory of evolution is wrong. So, all your cancer research is out of date. So,
I mean, I agree that, humor works best when it's closely juxtaposed with tragedy. And I personally, we were speaking of the Coen brothers before. I think humor works best when it's sometimes juxtaposed with dark tragedy because it makes the humor spark all that much brighter. And I try to do that in my writing when I can.
Yeah, and in the case of the Coen brothers, it is so well combined with violence. Yes. It's a combination of violence and humor, which is, you could say, it's just opposite. But you couldn't watch a whole film with such violence if there was not humor in it. So it's just a perfect combination.
This is the Coen brothers we were talking about. Joanne and Ethan Coen, Barton Fink, and all of that, Fargo.
Laughter is a so complicated phenomenon. You doctor, you might be know that in our anatomy, the number of our muscles used for laughter, 24 or 34 muscles, and same muscles are responsible for crying. If you cry or if you laugh, you just don't make any sound. In a television, you mute the sound. You will be confused. He is crying or he is laughing.
তাহলে এখন লাফিং ক্লাবের জায়গায় ক্রাইং ক্লাব করে নেওয়া যায়
হতে পারে that in Charlie's film, when Charlie Chaplin eats that chewing shoe nail.
Yeah. In the Gold Rush when he cooks the shoe and.
Will we laugh? It is laughing matter, or should we
cry?
We are not crying even. We are not crying even, but we are still. We are still down. So in there is some humor that is black humor. This is so complex. We cannot laugh, but this element that make us laugh, make us any fun, it is good. But fun or laughter has some category: grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, etc.
Like cancer. Okay.
I just want to say that related to this idea that is so good about the same muscles are used for crying or laughing, is we are absurd creatures as human beings because our genital organs are meant to be for sex, but also they are neighbors with the ones for excretion. So it's like we are absurd.
Yeah, love has pitched his tent next to the seat of excrement. That's not me. That's either Yeats or Eliot. I forget one of them. So we'll take questions from the audience now. Yes, please, gentlemen.
I don't know whether everybody knows. In America, one Indian has done a sixth sense instrument, small instrument, and you simply do like this: 9, 3, 4, 2, and just put your hand like this, and you can talk. So it has become a reality. It seems magic, but it has become reality. So what we know, what we do not know, we think it is not reality. This thing happens. As you mentioned about the trees and the embracing the tree, I do that. And just like as your mobile you charge, I get charged. I'm at 8, I'm very happy with that. I'm doing that exercise for last 6 years, and I feel that, yes, I get a energy even more than food from the tree, people trees especially. So there are so many magic things, and so many realities. So what you want to say about that? Thank you.
Can we take a couple of questions more? A gentleman here had a... Sir, up.
Yeah, good evening to everybody. So my question is, actually, you have discussed realism and absurdism, the best way to capture our complex times. What I have heard from you, I have a question. Being a learner and teacher of literature, I have a question. And particularly, the doctor has got me all the more confounded by mentioning the name of Trump the Great. So today, everything, and he also very pointedly chipped in from time to time, Padmavat and expulsion of Darwinism, everything. So are we progressing towards realistic absurdity or absurd realism? Can there be such a coinage in the near future? Are we moving towards it? Realistic absurdity or absurd realism?
Okay. We'll take 3 questions, 4, 5, 7, no. 2 of you, quickly. Bosho bolun, you can sit, I think. We are sitting.
So I had to ask that the social media, we are now just attacked by the Facebook and Instagram. I feel that all of us are living who are using the social media. We are all doing absurd things. Do you also feel the same? The social media itself, is it an absurd platform or it is a real thing?
And you, next to
Okay, my question is particularly to Cristina, ma'am. Ma'am, you said that you frequently use senses in your novels. So being a literature student, I wanted to know that, do you feel your novels or yourself connected to the concept of synesthesia? Like, is it also absurdism or it is nearly connected to realism? Because from the Romantic age, as history of literature goes on, we know about synesthesia and how senses play a role in all the novels and poetry and any part of literature.
I think that also... So we've had 4 questions. I'll just sum up. The first has to do with this new technology, and it was, Arthur C. Clarke who famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we do, this looks like a magical thing. It is a magical thing in many ways. The second question had to do with are we going towards an absurd reality or a realistic absurdity? The third had to do with social media, and the fourth was specifically to Cristina about synesthesia. So maybe we'll let her think about her answer first, Cristina, and do any of the others want to come in on the comments that were here, especially on social media, I think, and realistic absurdity and absurd reality. Vikram, you're the doctor.
Well, Franz Kafka, as Cristina mentioned, the genius insight that he had, which I think hadn't been had prior to him, is that the post-industrialized world was turning human societies into machines, and us humans into cogs within that machine. And not necessarily cogs without volition, but in a way cogs that seem to be functioning in the world without explanation. So we just go about our roles very often without understanding why we are doing them. And so I think it's going to be impossible to predict where we are going next, but social media and the internet, as I mentioned, one of the things that it has really done is produce what I think is a crisis of information. Where just like the infinite library, there is now so much, I remember in the early 90s when the internet first came out, I remember thinking to myself that now no one has an excuse to be ignorant, because finally all of the sources of information are available to you. But the internet has now turned in a way into Borges' library. You can look into it and find any nonsensical theory that you want supported. And so I think we may be entering a new digital Kali Yuga going forward, and how this is going to settle out and how humans are going to develop this complex relationship with technology and massive amounts of information, and whether we will settle into an absurdist reality or a realist absurdity is something that I'm as curious as you to know.
Mercedes?
I'm ready to say something about social media, and mainly it is Instagram thing in which we can create a narrative about ourselves and a fiction. I think it's a symptom of our times, and we, in maybe in 20 years' time, we will be able to know why we needed this desperately, because there will be other technologies. But I think it has to do with a difficult world in which we are like doing permanently a job interview in life. So you have to cause a good impression because there is such competitivity and nothing is for sure. So you have to be the best and the nicest, the most beautiful. So I think Instagram is like, we are permanently 24 hours per day available for a potential job interview about how we are. So these are also like the tentacles of that, which is, I think is sad.
Wait a minute. Swapnamoy.
One sentence about absurd reality or realistic absurdism. You were chatting with some unknown person who is thousands years away, but you are not exchanging any sentence to your neighbor or your next door neighbor, even with your wife. This is realistic absurdism. And when witch burning is there, this is real. This is realistic absurdism.
Thank you. Now,
yeah, I really appreciate that question. I like it very much. Thank you. It was, for me, something so important, senses. As I said before, I also teach creative writing, and it's something which I always say to my students, because we may write with our brain, or we may read with our brain, but if the reader doesn't feel what he's reading, if the reader doesn't touch, doesn't smell, doesn't hear what it's reading, you will never get to the reader. Imagine you want to create compassion, or you want to create grief, or you want to create love, or whatever emotion. If you don't use senses, you have nothing to do. I was very happy to find out about an Indian writer, Sadat Manto. He writes in Urdu, I think, and well, I read him in English, and he's got a short story called Odor, the smell, and I found so many connections with, with what I try to write, and but as I said at the beginning, I thought I knew something about senses, but after being here for 2 days, I think I really have to learn something about senses.
Thank you. A couple of other questions there at the back, and then you and then you. Yeah. And will the organizers tell me how much time we have left? Someone? Oh, okay, right. So, yeah.
Hello, good evening to everyone. My question is directed towards Vikram sir. So the idea of a diseased body that you mentioned in your story, it is extremely intriguing for me the way you said, because in the works of Michel Foucault, as I'm sure you might have read, that how the idea of a diseased body is something that is pathological for the normal body. So the idea that magic realism or absurdism, for you, is it something, a rupture from the reality, or simply is it an instance of an alternative form of reality? So this is what I would like to know from you.
While he's thinking about the answer, we'll take a question from the gentleman there to your left, and then we come to you. Yeah.
Hello, good evening. I always thought that there should be a strong logical base behind every magic realistic story. Is that true? What do you people think?
Okay, good question. And final question, and then we'll take the answers. And time enough for? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh no, this chap at the back. Okay, no, you ask and then he asks and then we, quickly.
Yeah, so not a question precisely, but a comment that while we are talking about absurdity and isn't like if we get back to the myth of Sisyphus, like waking up in the morning, doing the same thing again and again and again. So is it not enough absurd in its own way? The real life is it not enough absurd beyond magic realism as well? Is it absurd already? So that's a comment only. Yeah.
You disguised your comment as a question. Well done.
Good evening to everyone. I have two questions, one for Vikram sir. You spoke about the Library of Babel, and you spoke about how we are in a sea of information. So do you think, and this is for all of the panelists, do you think that we are drowning in information while we are starving for the so-called wisdom that we read books and other things for? And my other question is, to all of you as well, that particularly inspired by Mr. Jose Saramago's Blindness, where Saramago talks about people going blind all of a sudden, and there's a complete breakdown of society, and he critiques the society and he critiques the government. Do you think that that kind of critique, that kind of dark comedy and satire is required for our times right now?
Okay, so answers. Vikram, you had two questions.
Well, I can address the first question about disease. You know, we live our lives as if we were Cartesians. You know, as Descartes posited that the mind is a separate substance from our bodies. So we just live our lives as if our mind is some normally functioning, independently functioning entity, and a body is like a robotic thing that we move around our lives. But introduce a little amount of alcohol into your bloodstream and then see how that changes the way you think. Get a pneumonia and see how that changes the way you think. And so in a way, a disease is an absurdity because it rips you out of your daily existence and puts you into a completely alternative world. Every day I see patients who were completely fine and living their daily lives and living what they thought was a normal existence, and suddenly they plunge into this absurd field of emergency departments and hospitals and blood draws and nurses waking them up at 3 a.m. to wake up to check their pressure. And so I actually agree. I think disease really is a very absurd aberration, and I like to explore it a lot in my writing. I'm so glad you mentioned Blindness. That is actually one of my top 3 books. Jose Saramago's Blindness, if you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend reading it. And I do think that it really depicts human conflict and what can happen to human society really well. I just want to end with one last point, which is, since you mentioned Saadat Hasan Manto, there's a very famous short story of his about partition, where there's a mental asylum that's on the border between India and Pakistan, and it's supposed to get partitioned, and the question is where do the Hindu lunatics go and where do the Muslim lunatics go? And there's a Sikh lunatic who's causing a lot of trouble. So I will say that absurdism can be applied to any context in history.
Yeah, I would like to answer to this question. It was there about logical base of magical stories. I think once, for example, you decide that you have a flying carpet, you have to start making yourself realistic questions like, imagine you're levitating on a rug, on a carpet. Is the ground flat or is it undulate? If I go up, am I cold or not? So, and this is also the kind of key to magical realism, having this connection with reality, or what you said about the talking by cell phone with America, which is like magic. I think we don't think now that this is magic, but it is. But you really have to, once you accept it, this is magic or reality, whatever, you have to ask yourself, okay, am I listening to the voice on the other side? Is the voice okay? Is it my wife? Is it my children? These realistic questions. I think everything has to do with human truth. what we're looking for when we're reading is human truth.
Mercedes?
Yeah, I just want to mention that it's in the tradition of magic realism, many of those books were produced in societies that lived like in a violent context and with lots of difficulties. So that was like a way of escaping. Is in a way like what the unconscious does at night when we dream. It's like an onirical production of something when there is no more repression in our brain. So that fiction, I think, works in a way like that.
Thank you. Swapnamoy, I think, should have the last word, the senior most amongst us. Sir, apni jodi respond karen.
Respond, I think all are clear here, but there is no limit of making clear. This is absurd. Always this anything about literature, this is absurd. This is foggy. We cannot come to any conclusion. Never. We cannot.
So I think without that
this is beauty of literature.
Yes.
This is beauty.
So we will not conclude, but we will come to the end of this session. So thank you all for being such a wonderful audience, and thank you the panelists. Thank you, sir. Thanks.